Men, have you not got a clue what to do when it comes to the strengthening of your body, in particular, your joints? Well, let me tell you, if you give this video your full attention, you will not only understand how your joints work, but also what you can do in order to strengthen them. My name is Paul Green, and I'm a former Special Forces Support Group operator and British paratrooper. My specialisation over the past decade has been a physical training instructor, and over the past 4 or 5 years I have worked closely with physiotherapists and exercise rehab instructors as the army has had a massive push to reduce injury rates and save a shitload of money. They have successfully done that. So my coaching background varies from high performance all the way to injury, post-injury pathways. I also run an online coaching service called the Longevity Program, in which I train men over 40 to build strong joints, resilient joints, and then improve their performance in whatever field they are currently in. Before I get into the 5-step process, it is absolutely crucial that you understand how your joint moves. Now, if it's the knee, your knee moves in 2 ways. You can either extend your knee, which is the shortening of the quadricep muscles and the extension of the hamstring muscles. Opposing that would be flexing the knee joint, which is shortening of the hamstring, extending of the quads. If we move up the body, we start to get into the hip joint. The hip joint is a very complex joint, and if we were to flex the hip joint, that would be bringing the knee up towards our chest. We would be shortening the hip flexor muscles, and we would be extending the glute muscles. Opposite to that would be extension of the hip, which is shortening of the glute muscles and the extension of the hip flexors. Our hip also moves out, which is called abduction, and that is us working the outside parts of our glute, and it also moves in, which is adduction. This is when we start working our groin muscles. Our hip also has got 2 other ways of moving. It also rotates. Hopefully, with that little overview, you can appreciate why it's important that you understand how the joint moves, because if you understand how the joint moves, you may only be weak in one way that joint moves. For example, you might be really strong with your hip flexors, but your hip extension might be really weak. So hopefully you understand you wouldn't waste time training your internal and external rotation if you didn't need to. If you had a hip flexor problem, you would not need to waste time with hip external and internal rotation. So it's important understanding which range of motion is needed to be trained. So the plan of this video is to take you through a 5-step process, and you need to do all the steps, or at the very least you need to have an understanding of every step, and then you need to decide where you sit in that 5-step process. Do that step very well, then progress on to the next step, and then progress on to the next step. Step number 1, assessment. You need to assess accurately where you currently are. Now, if you are injured, then you need an expert to diagnose, basically to do that assessment for you. A physio's job is to predict, using a bunch of different tests, is to predict what the issue is that you currently have. If you don't have any issues, then don't go and see a physio. You can make that assessment yourself. So yeah, a physio basically is a general practitioner, like a doctor of the joints. I like to call them a GP of injuries. They know a general overview of loads of different injuries in the body. However, they're not really a specialist in one area. You can get knee specialists and hip specialists and stuff like that. They have literally studied one joint and all the problems that come from that joint for 10, 20, 30 years. Physios know a little bit about everything. They will predict, using a bunch of different tests, what your issue is. Yeah, by all means, pay them 60 quid and get an assessment from them. But bear in mind, that is only a prediction. MRI scan will give you a massively more accurate assessment of what the hell is going on in that joint. Like I said earlier on, assessment is required, whether it's from yourself, if you are not injured, or if you are injured, an assessment from a physio or getting a scan. This information is absolutely crucial to ensure that you are not guessing with your programming. Happy with that? That's step number 1. Step number 2, isometric loading. First of all, we need to understand what isometric actually means. Isometric is when we tense our muscle, but there is no change in the joint length. So for example, if we were isometrically loading the bicep, we would be tensing our bicep really hard, and there would be no change in the elbow angle. Do you understand that? Happy days. Isometric contractions are absolutely amazing for post-injury strengthening. The reason being is it basically gets all the blood and nutrients to the areas required to strengthen the joint without aggravating the joint. So when you tense really hard, you're actually getting the strength benefits, but yeah, at a limited range of motion because you are stuck in that same position. You're getting all the strength benefits, blood and nutrients to these areas that need it most without aggravating tendons and ligaments and stuff like that. So for example, if your elbow hurts and your bicep hurts when your arm is in the extended position, you will then start to isometrically load your bicep when it's at its shortened range of motion. And then incrementally, you will then build up to being able to isometrically load your bicep in an extended position. But you will do this incrementally, and that is isometric loading through a full range of motion. Obviously, your goal is always to work the muscle doing that contraction through a full range of motion. However, I do understand it is a process. After you have done isometric contractions through the full range of motion and you have no pain in that area anymore, then you are ready to move on to step number 3. Step number 3, eccentric loading. Eccentric loading is where we focus on the controlled lengthening of the target muscle. Using the bicep again as that example, you would assist yourself with the shortening of the bicep phase, and then you would really focus in on the lengthening of the bicep. Step number 4, concentric loading. Concentric loading is the opposite to eccentric. It's when the primary muscle, we are focusing in on the shortening of that muscle through the full range of motion. Obviously, typically the weight that you can lift on the eccentric loading is going to be a little bit more than the weight that you can lift on the concentric loading. So you might have to strip the weight back to what you were doing on the eccentric a little bit, and then you are going to focus on the concentric. But with that, bear in mind that you are going to assist yourself on the lowering phase of the movement. So very straightforward. Again, step number 4, concentric loading is the priority. Step number 5 is normal, full range of motion, strength training. Obviously, so steps 1, 2, and 3, they are the most commonly missed and they are the most powerful things that you can have in your arsenal in order to reduce pain, improve your joint strength. Step number 4 and step number 5 is basically what improves your joint resilience. If you do step number 5, basically most people will do steps 1 and 2 and they will go back to their sport, go back in the gym and crack on as normal because there is no pain. Step number 1, 2, and 3 will get rid of your pain. No dramas whatsoever. Step number 4 and 5, they will guarantee that these issues do not become reoccurring. So, just to conclude, just to summarise, step number 1, assessment. Whether you're assessing yourself because you haven't got an injury and where you fit in this scale. Step number 2, isometric loading. Number 3, eccentric loading. Step number 4, concentric loading. Step number 5, full range of motion. Gone are the days of you focusing on half range of motion repetitions. When you get to the last stage, your priority is to start strengthening your muscles and joints through a full range of motion. And once you've started that journey, it doesn't just end after a couple of weeks. This is now you until a random issue comes up and then you need to address it. Okay, cool. Back in the real world, now my bicep issues have completely gone. But yeah, I've just received a knee issue. I've just fucking tweaked my knee. Okay, cool. You've tweaked your knee. Awesome. So what do we do about that? Right, we're happy that our reoccurring elbow issue isn't coming back up, but now we need to deal with a knee issue. What can I do about this? So then, assessment. Either assess yourself, do I need to go and see a physio? Can I afford to go and see a physio, or can I afford an MRI scan? Physio, £60 an hour, MRI scan, £350 for a scan. Is it that serious? Can I try some isometric loading and see if the pain relieves itself? Cool. How do I isometrically load the knee? And then how do I isometrically load the knee? Incrementally, through the full range of motion. Am I pain-free? Cool. Can I go on to eccentric loading? And then the process repeats itself. Having this 5-step guide in your back pocket whenever you have any issues whatsoever will be unbelievably useful for you. I swear to God, this is the best stuff I know. It's the most powerful thing I know. Because I know when people have issues, people have injuries, they rest. They go to the doctors. The doctor, what does a doctor? A doctor sells you tablets. Right? There's some anti-inflammatories. put some ice on it. Anti-inflammatories they basically reduce swelling around the joint. What does swelling do? Swelling basically highlights to your body that there's an issue there. I need some blood and nutrients, please. Anti-inflammatories, anti-inflame, reduces that swelling, so then there's less blood and nutrients going to these areas. Ice, after an injury, yes, it'll reduce pain, but it'll reduce the amount of blood and nutrients going to these areas in order to recover, repair, regenerate. If you follow that pathway, honestly, if you follow that pathway and not only understand and appreciate and know how to implement it in your life, you will be miles better suited in strengthening your joints any point in the future. Gentlemen, thank you very much for making it this far into the video. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It helps me out and it gives me guidance in which videos you want to see in the future, what style of videos you find useful. If you want to see more of this stuff, I am posting this daily now for the rest of my life. So I will see you tomorrow.